Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And you are listening to LBC, where we turn our attention to another acronym, the EU, first this morning, with a question that is born of my own impressions, which could, of course, be wrong, and inspired really by my own ignorance. Well, why are we a little bit more Eurosceptic than other member states? The only ones to be having a referendum, the only ones really to be fearful of ludicrous statistics like the fact that because we're members, 500 million people could all come and live here tomorrow. I know that Marine Le Pen in France just enjoyed a storming performance, albeit not quite as storming as initially seemed likely, but why in this country do you think we are more Eurosceptic? And, do you know, as I asked that question, or as I came up with it earlier, I found myself thinking, well, actually, mate, you don't know enough about European countries to answer that question. Language, you know, is on the decline in this country. The number of kids you'll meet who can speak a second European language, and we were young, it'd be French usually, wouldn't it? And then German, maybe Spanish. Number of kids now that are doing A-levels and degrees in modern languages is at an all-time low. We're in many ways, weird though it may seem at a time of globalization and increased mobility right across the planet, we are increasingly isolated in many ways. We're not learning the languages. You could, of course, tell me you don't need to. Anyway, you'd be better off learning Mandarin, James. You don't need to learn French or German. But still, it's odd that we're doing it less than we used to do it at a time when European integration is at the greatest it's ever been. It's 6 minutes after 10. I'd like you to dive in early this morning if you fancy it. The simple enough question is well, I put why in brackets. So you've got, is the UK more Eurosceptic than other EU members? And then at the front of that, I put why in brackets. Why is the UK more Eurosceptic than other Euro or European Union members? And it occurs to me that the number of people listening to this programme from other European countries will probably be higher than it would be in any other European capital. Aren't we the 6th largest French population in London? London's 4 times the size of Paris, you know. So although I'm familiar with the fact that France divides into various regions, I think you can still talk of France as a homogenous body in the same way you can talk about Britain, but you can also talk about England, talk about Germany. These are all states, if you like, that seem to me to have different attitudes towards the notion of being friends and neighbours, towards the notion of being integrated. I wonder, and what we're going to do today is try to avoid arguments about whether or not the EU is the Fourth Reich, as some people genuinely do contend. My Twitter is a place like a safari park some mornings, I've got to tell you. The EU-SSR is a popular meme. The Fourth Reich, or the Fifth Reich, actually, I think some of them have lost count. It's all a plan to take over the world. I don't want to do that today. We'll do that on another day, probably when there's a full moon. But today, it's a broad observation that we in this country seem to be a lot more tied up in this issue than other European countries are. There is Euroscepticism represented in all other European parliaments, but it is not, I don't believe, represented among the population on the scale that it is here. So that's question number 1, 0345 6060 973, if you can tell me why. Oh, actually, if you've got a perspective on another country, if you're of French extraction, German, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian, Polish, what do you think about my suggestion simply that we are more Eurosceptic than they are? 0345 6060 973. And I'd put Germany at the top of the list just to deal immediately with all the claims that, oh, it's because we put in more than we take out. I mean, Germany and France would do that as well. Most of the major economies would arguably put in more than they take out in strictly financial terms. Of course, what you're taking out in uncountable terms, unstatistical terms, would be a massive mobile workforce. The bigger the economy, the more you benefit from that. David Cameron today is negotiating over this ludicrous red herring about 4-year hiatus on in-work benefits that can be claimed by EU migrants. It seems to me to be an illustration of just how ludicrous this whole debate has become. And they changed the law on whether or not unemployed EU migrants can claim benefits, despite the fact that their own statistics suggested that none of them were We tried to get the numbers under freedom of information. It was utterly, utterly negligible. I've said I don't want to have sort of lazy toing and froing on this today, so I will curtail my habit of pointing out UKIP's idiocy on most subjects for the duration of this hour, but it was clearly a response to UKIP scaremongering that caused David Cameron to bring in laws that affected nobody really, but just sort of generally provided a notion of clamping down harder on EU migrants. Or, and this might be one of the things that pops up on the list of reasons why we seem more Eurosceptic, we're a bit more xenophobic. Not in a horrible, virulent, rancid, racist way, just in a little bit of an island way. We're an island nation. We're surrounded by sea. We're surrounded by sea, and that possibly, I don't know, creates a mentality that lends itself a little bit more readily to insularity than land borders would. I don't know that that's true. I've got to be honest with you. Looking at the massive land masses across the world where war is almost constant, I don't necessarily see that a little bit of fear of foreigners is confined to people who are surrounded by oceans and seas, but that might be on the list. I just want to make a list, and of course what we'll begin with is that simple suggestion that we are actually a little bit more Eurosceptic than other European countries. So start off by helping me with that. 0345 6060 973, and then we'll move on to the question of why. Why do we seem to be a little bit more... If I said the word obsessed, would I be breaking my own promise not to get rude? Why do we seem to be a little bit more obsessed with European Union membership? And I failed, I'm afraid, earlier in the week when we were talking about climate change. I don't want people to answer this question by simply saying, well, I understand the science better than everybody else does. I understand the science better than all the scientists do. So I don't think it helps to say, well, I understand why the EU is evil in a way that the other European member states don't. I've got a much classier understanding of these issues. And I don't mean to be pejorative, but usually those are the arguments put forward by people saying really silly things like 500 million people could come and live here tomorrow, which is the logical equivalent of saying, categorically logical equivalent, if we don't sterilise every woman in the country right now of childbearing age, we could sink under the weight of new babies by the end of next year. That is the legal equivalent, the logical equivalent of counting everybody that lives in the EU and saying we've got to leave in case they all come and live here. You could say there is absolutely nothing in the statute books. Did you realise there is no law in this land that could stop every single person in the country moving to Norwich at tea time today? That's the logical equivalent of saying we must come out of the EU because 500 million people might move here tomorrow. We must come out of, I don't know, the United Kingdom because everybody could move to Norwich at tea time today. These are just silly. And yet they speak to me of a level of obsession that seems to be absent from other European member states. 0345 6060 973. So what is it that explains why we are more focused on this than others? And remember, your answer, it can't really be immigration, can it? Because all the other countries are affected by that as well. So it's not immigration per se. It might have something to do with our attitude to immigrants. I don't know. And then we're back to xenophobia, and I really want to be a little bit more sophisticated than that today. 0345 6060 973 to tell me whether or not it's right to suggest that the United Kingdom, well, Scotland isn't, is it? But you know, swathes of the United Kingdom are more Eurosceptic than the rest of the European Union. And if we've done the whether it's true or not, we can move swiftly on to the why you think that might be. And this, look, hand on heart, I'd like to do it in a way that doesn't just tick xenophobia at every turn. And part of the reason for that is that it's not true. I can't remember whether I've told you this before. I don't think I'm betraying any confidences, but I was introduced to political Euroscepticism at a surprisingly young age by one of my closest friends, one of my oldest friends, who happens to be the son of Bill Cash, the Conservative MP. Bill's younger son is one of my oldest mates. I've known him since I was 13. And we were on the stump in Staffordshire wearing Vote Bill Cash T-shirts at a time when Euroscepticism was really, really quite an eccentric, outlying position within the fringes of the Conservative Party. I read his book. I read Bill's book on the Maastricht Treaty. I know, everyone else was reading Fiesta at that stage of their lives, but I worked my way through Bill's book on the Maastricht Treaty. So I know it's not just xenophobia, but I don't think that academic forensic unpicking of treaties and sovereignties lies at the heart of our scepticism. And if it does, again, we come back to the question of why do we care so much when other countries don't seem to? Are we that different? Crikey, is that the time already? Joe, I will come to you first after the travel news. After Joe, it could be you. The number you need remains the same, 0345 6060 973. Just looking at a couple of front pages today. One's got a plea to Europe, don't turn your back on Syrian refugees. Some research undertaken by The Independent suggests that we are less empathetic, less welcoming, less warm than most other European countries. Bulgaria pippers at the post, actually. They're even less generous than we are. I don't think that's a mystery. I think our media is much more commercialised than other countries, and you sell more cakes by trying to frighten people and make them angry than you do by trying to make them warm and welcoming. So inevitably, huge swathes of our population have been turned against Syrian refugees. It doesn't mean that we're more xenophobic than other European Union countries. And another one here, Cameron's EU reforms ripped up by Merkel. Germany will not back benefit curbs for migrants. The former Polish foreign minister, who was in the Bullingdon Club with David Cameron, was giggling on the radio earlier today because he said, I don't know what Cameron's expecting to do. Everybody in the room knows, for example, that the Poles, who make up by far the biggest EU migration statistic into this country, contribute far more to the system than they take out. Everybody else in the room knows that. Cameron knows that, but he's got a political landscape at home that means he sort of has to pretend that these people who are contributing more to our country than they're taking out have to be, quotes, clamped down on in order to make, I don't know, some colonel at the golf club feel better as he pours himself his second scotch and soda of the day. And I've already broken my promise not to get rude. So let's do it from your end of the telescope. Why? Why do we care more about this than other European countries? And can you come up with an answer that doesn't paint us in a negative light? It's 10:15.
From the LBC Travel Centre, I'm Chris Golds. Good morning. On the M25, a car's broken down on the exit slip road clockwise, making it very slow heading towards junction 30 for the A13. And those roadworks still causing issues on the M4. Long delays in both directions towards junction 5 for Langley. That's on the M4. Lorries broken down on the A10 heading north between the Harlow turnoff and the Hertford turnoff. It's currently slow on the approach. No change in Warwickshire on the M6 heading south. Accident investigation work continues following an accident at about 10 to 6 this morning between junction 2 for Coventry and junction 1 for Rugby. At the moment, it's still very slow back towards junction 3 for Nuneaton, taking you about half an hour to get through the diversion. You just need to follow the hollow triangle symbols. More online at lbc.co.uk. Keeping it moving. Your next travel updates in half an hour.
This is LBC.
Hello, I'm Ian McKellen. I want you to join me in supporting Crisis this Christmas. Times are tough. While we're safe and warm inside, thousands of homeless people will be sleeping on the freezing streets. For just £22.29, you can reserve a place for someone at Crisis at Christmas. You'll give them food, clothes and safety, and the chance to move off the streets for good. So please go to crisis.org.uk and give £22.29 to bring someone in from the cold. Thank you.
Free, 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 free.
Don't splash out £4 on a Christmas TV listings magazine, because the biggest and best is
Free, free.
with Saturday's Daily Mail. 6 pages of giant-sized listings per day. A brilliant movie planner. 14 days of festive viewing, right into the new year. Bumper 120-page Christmas TV guide. Free inside Saturday's Daily Mail.
This Christmas at Staples, get up to 60% off selected headphones and speakers from Sennheiser, Sony and JBL. And there's 50% off the Acer Revo Mini Desktop with a 1TB drive. Was £298, now £149. Shop in store or online at staples.co.uk. It's all surprisingly Staples.
We wish used a Merry Christmas. Right now at your local Fiat dealer, get a £500 used car deposit contribution on all approved used Fiats. That's £500 you can put to good use on the other things that'll be used this Christmas, like indigestion tablets and family therapy. £500 off. But hurry, offer ends 20th of December. Visit your local Fiat dealer now. Terms and conditions apply. Representative 9.9% APR. Offer available 14th to the 20th of December. Finance subject to status. Fiat Financial Services.
Vodafone have a fantastic range of gift bundles available this Christmas. Like our pay-as-you-go bundle with... That's right, Terry! A Vodafone Smart Speed 6 plus 50 gigabytes of UK data and... a Gecko speaker. What did you just say? Oh, Terry.
You're flying without wings.
Get your bundle in-store today and get closer to the ones you love this Christmas. Vodafone. Power to you. That's right, terms apply.
James O'Brien, weekdays 10 till 1 on LBC.
18 minutes after 10, sort of international relations today. I want to know whether it's true to say that we are generally not only a little more Eurosceptical than our European partners, but also perhaps a little more obsessed with membership than they are. It's perhaps why we're the only ones having a referendum anytime soon. But of course, you can shoot down the second question by telling me that the premise of the first one is false. We are not more Eurosceptic. We possibly just talk about it more. Or, because we're in Britain, we don't realise that these conversations are unfolding on a similar level right across the continent. 0345 606 0973. The Children's Commissioner, Anne Longfield, will be joining me later today at about 11:30. She is a woman charged with, revolutionising really our attitudes to everything from child sex education to child poverty. Children's Commissioner, it's a catch-all term. If there's any question you'd like to put to her, get your thinking caps on now. And then after 11, tied perhaps to that topic, we'll look at this release of Stuart Hall and just wonder whether it does provide some evidence, does back up the suspicion that the establishment, whatever that may mean, continues to see child sex abuse through a much more less serious lens than the rest of us do. But we'll begin in Battersea. Joe's there. Joe, why are we more Eurosceptical, and if so, why?
Hi. I don't know if we are, to be honest. I've got no real experience of other European countries and what their views are. But I suggest that if we are, there are two reasons there might be. The first one is I don't think most people in the UK really understand the EU, what it does for us. There's all this chatter about leaving or staying in, but I don't think anybody really understands the reforms that David Cameron's suggesting at the moment.
Well, does anybody really care, though? I mean, I can't imagine, and this is perhaps a question we can add to the list, I cannot imagine, and I could be wrong, that there is anybody listening to this programme at the moment who thinks, right, at the moment, I'm a bit dubious about the European Union, I could go either way, but if he secures a ban upon people in work not getting in-work benefits for 4 years, that will clinch it for me. Do you think that will change a single mind in the land?
I think it could, but
really?
I think when most people think of the EU, they think of, bendy bananas and whether a kiwi fruit fits neatly into a box.
I don't want to. I'm not going to let you portray them as negatively and as shallowly as that. I'm sure that
I don't mean it in that. I think there is a lot more to the EU than that. But I think that a lot of the reforms being sought are misunderstood, and that actually there is, there's chatter of, restricting migrant workers' benefits, etc. And I think that would have impact on whether we decide to leave or not.
Do you really? I'm going to add that question to the list then. I'm going to call me now if restricting in-work benefits for migrant workers would make you vote to stay where currently you're poised to vote to leave. And I'm not setting you up here, Joe, but I'm going to predict that I don't get a single phone call. 0345 606 0973. There's 3 lines free, so you will get through. Why then do we have a more myopic understanding of it than other countries do? Why have we been led to this position of rejection?
The second point I'd make then is that I don't think we see its benefits or the things that it does as actively as other EU countries do. So 2 points on that. The first one is, if you look at the news every evening, you see the House of Commons, you see people in Westminster, there's very little coverage often of the EU Parliament and what's going on in it. And the second thing is issues like the Schengen area. We're not part of it. We don't understand what the free movement...
But we often seem to be crosser about it, we often seem to be crosser about Schengen than the countries that are in it.
Well, quite, because I think there is that fear of, migration coming to the UK, but we don't get to see the benefits of it in the sense that, if you're a Frenchman, you can cross into any other European country without having to show a passport. If I get on a plane tomorrow, I have to get my passport out to go into the EU.
Oh, this is interesting. So our scepticism...
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, but I hadn't thought of it that way around. You've turned it on its head, Joe. So our scepticism could in fact be born partly of the fact that we're not as fully into it as the countries that are less sceptical.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Crikey. I'm going to leave that one hanging. What a cracking first call. Talk about food for thought. Why are we more Eurosceptical? Well, because we haven't really gone in neck deep, James, like other countries have. We still have control, for example, over our borders. We don't have... we're not signatories to the Schengen Agreement. We're not part of the single currency. And yet I would suggest that our most prominent Eurosceptics, the really sort of loud and obvious ones, well, they talk about the single currency and Schengen, which we're not part of, a lot more negatively than the political leaders in the countries that are part of it. That's just weird. I hadn't thought of it that way round. Maybe you're right. Maybe it just looks awful because we're not in it, and if we were in it, we'd realise it wasn't. Although I can't quite see you winning any converts to the euro. Have we had any calls yet from someone who's going to switch from leave to stay if David Cameron successfully secures a ban on in-work benefits for EU migrants for a period of 4 years? One call. Just one. Seriously, even if you've never phoned a radio station before, as long as you're telling the truth, all you have to do and say on air is, yeah, me. And then you can go. You can go back to your Allbrand. Nick's in Dagenham. Nick, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. First time caller, so a bit nervous.
Are you this man? Are you going to change your vote depending upon a ban on in-work benefits for EU migrants for 4 years?
No, I
right.
wouldn't.
Carry on. Why did you ring?
No, but I do believe we are a bit Eurosceptic, but I do believe it's a bit justified in the sense that most European countries since joining the EU have managed to keep their culture. England somehow has lost its culture while joining the EU.
How do you mean?
I think it should. Because, I mean, as a young black guy growing up in London, I've heard a lot of elderly white men or white women saying, this country isn't what it used to be anymore. I do hear that quite a lot. And at first I was a bit, I don't really get it.
But they haven't lost their culture.
I believe you do. When you look at other nations like Spain and Germany and...
Germany's got Pegida, hasn't it? The far-right anti-Islam movement that claims their culture's under threat.
I've never actually been to Germany.
Nor have I, but I read the odd paper. They've got a much more virulent, albeit small, anti-Islamic movement than we have. It's not necessarily Eurosceptic, but it doesn't... They're constantly banging on about losing their culture.
Yeah,
so is Marine Le Pen.
Not anything to do with Islam or anything. I just mean that the true British values, true British culture aren't really here anymore. And I think that's what's really irking a lot of people, whereas when they go to other countries, they see that, yes, we're in Spain, yes, we're in Germany.
Hang on a minute. I know people say this, but I'm surprised that you're nodding along with them. What would you point to first? And this isn't a trick question. I'll give you as long as you want, or you can tell me that it's an unfair inquiry. Yeah. What would you point to? What's not here anymore in cultural terms that used to be?
To be honest, I'm very young, so this is all I've known. This is how it's always.
Yeah, but you've heard old people saying it. Yeah, what examples do they give you?
Well, it's just the way things are. They're a bit. They say we're too tolerant with things.
But that's a British value. That's part of British culture. There were 30 different nationalities on the Trafalgar when Nelson was sailing it. And at the Battle of Trafalgar, it wasn't the name of his ship.
I mean, religious culture. British food.
So people can't go to church anymore if they want to. People can't buy a bacon sandwich if they want to. They're being stopped from eating sausages.
I believe the influx of people coming in with their different cultures.
But all the other European countries have that as well. Several of them on a bigger scale than us.
Other European cultures haven't been influenced.
What?
By the people coming in.
Okay.
I don't believe so.
All right, but you haven't visited any.
Well, I have, but I've not been to Germany.
It's all right. Yeah, I mean, I think you portray an answer. People have a perception, but when you ask them, they do what you do. They fold like a deck of cards. What can't you do anymore? What part of your culture has been taken away? And to make us somehow different, I'd say we were more insulated. We've been less successful in some areas at integrating. So what is it that makes us more Eurosceptic? Because I don't think, Nick, any of the people you've listened to argue that French people or German people or Polish people are stealing our culture. That's usually an argument reserved for racists and Islamophobes. Steve's in Nottingham. Steve, what would you like to say?
Oh, right, yeah, I'm just phoning up, James, because you did say earlier on that you don't think you get one phone call at all for anybody that would change their mind.
Yes.
Hello. Well, I'm one.
So if he comes back today and says the person working next to you at work tomorrow, if he's arrived from Poland, he can't claim what you can claim for the next 4 years, then you'd vote to stay?
Yes. Yes.
Why would it make you feel happier about him being here?
Because that is my biggest, and most people's, to be honest, in most surveys, that is the biggest thing that affects most people or all people is the amount of immigration. Not immigrants.
Whoa, no. They're not doing anything to reduce immigration. They're just giving less to the.
If it does reduce it, which is his stated aim, to reduce it, then that would be good enough for me. Then we'd have to go from there. If it didn't reduce it from that, then you'd have to look at it again.
Well, you wouldn't be able to, would you? And you've already voted to stay. I mean, to be honest, if it happens, and it's unlikely that it will, statistically it's meaningless. Utterly, utterly meaningless. That's why there's no number out there. If it was a big number, if David Cameron was saying, if we bring this in, we'll save X billion or X million pounds a year, he'd be shouting it from the rooftops. The only thing it addresses is the feeling that you've just articulated very eloquently, the feeling that there's just too many of them. If we make life a little bit harder, somehow your life will improve, Steve. And you believe that?
No, it won't improve. No, I'm not bothered about my life improving. I'm not.
So you just want theirs to be worse?
No. I agree with immigration. I agree with immigration. I don't dislike immigrants. This is what you keep saying. You keep saying this thing about fearing. I don't dislike.
No, xenophobia is a thing. I'm not accusing you of it, but you say you don't.
But what you do,
you don't think your life would improve, but you want to make their life worse.
No, I don't see the point of mass unfettered immigration. I don't want this country tarmacking over. That's it. You know, it's as simple as that. It's numbers. I'm not bothered who they are and where they're from. My father was Polish.
Oh,
I'm not bothered where they're from.
Okay.
I'm not bothered where they're from. You know, I'm not racist as far as Islam or blacks or whatever.
No.
I don't see the point of a country our size being stuffed to the gunnels. And
when you talk about being tarmacked over, what percentage of the country do you think is built on?
I know it's a very small amount. I know.
Well, why do you say it in that tone of voice?
I don't want to see any.
So what is the number? What is the number?
I don't want.
What is the number?
Less than probably 4%. I don't know, 8%.
So where does tarmacking?
I'm going to say 40%.
No. You've gone lower than the actual answer. You've got it wrong in the other direction. But we'll park that for a minute. Why do you use words like tarmacked when in the same breath you say, oh, it's probably only 4% of the country that's been built on?
I don't want to see cities built the size of Coventry to make up for lack of housing.
Well, they've been telling us that for 20 years. Where's the city they've built that's the size of Coventry?
No, that is what...
Apart from Coventry, of course.
Well, people like you...
People like me.
We need more housing. Where do you think the housing's going to be built?
No, you just told me that we've only built on 4% of the country. You've answered your own question, Steve.
Yes, but I don't want any more of it building on.
Okay. So if 96% of the country is currently not built on, as I say, you've got it wrong, but it's your number, that's your perception. 96% of the country hasn't been built on, and your political attitude to European Union membership is a desperate desire to see that 96% remain unbuilt on. And you think that taking away in-work benefits from people for 4 years who come from a population that way contributes more to our economy than it takes out will help.
Well, that's your. I don't agree with that. But
well, no, you do, Steve. If you can count, you agree with that.
I don't agree with it because they haven't started putting the infrastructure in yet to pay for the amount of people that have come in.
And what are they going to pay for it with?
Well, when they start to pay for that, and don't forget, these people get old as well, and then you'll...
So do you, Steve. So does your Polish dad. Yes. And you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we found one fella who claimed that he would change his vote on the EU if they took out in-work benefits for the tiny proportion of EU migrants that would qualify for them after they've got rid of tax credits. Fair play. I'm sure he wasn't fibbing, but I think his fears of seeing the country tarmacked over are unlikely to be assuaged by a curb on in-work benefits for a tiny proportion of the migrant workforce. I could be wrong, just like he was wrong about 4% of the country currently being built on. I think the real figure is about 11%. More land dedicated to golf courses in this country than to housing. We're not full in that sense. But every other country's Eurosceptic arm makes the same arguments. Every other country that talks about immigration as a potentially bad thing, or they say uncontrolled mass immigration, they have exactly the same arguments, but they're not running the risk of taking their ball home in a referendum next year. We are. Why? Why are we more Eurosceptic than other countries? 0345 6060 973. Martin has tweeted to say, it's the stranglehold which the right-wing media have, which the right wing have on the media and the government over the past decade, that's made anti-European sentiment dominant. Really? I don't know that it has. I don't know that David Cameron is particularly Eurosceptic. He's been Prime Minister for 6 years. Nick Clegg was Deputy Prime Minister. He's a staunch Europhile. The media, I grant you, probably sells more copies telling us to be scared and angry than it does telling us to be calm, telling us to be cool. Stay cool is not really going to be a front page. Get furious is on various front pages every day. But my problem with those sort of arguments is that they cast us as stupid, as credulous fools being led by the nose towards positions of division and hatred, which are really very little to do with reality. And that's a hugely patronising position, Martin, although I know I've fallen into the trap of defending it myself and probably will again, probably before 11 o'clock today. James is in Welwyn Garden City. James, is it true that we're more Eurosceptic, and if so, why?
Hi, morning. Yeah, in my opinion, yes, absolutely. And it's all to do with a little stretch of water, just the channel. Makes all the difference. So I'm Dutch and grew up in Holland until I was 14. And in school, the European continent was on the map. The map on the map, the European continent was all pink, including the UK.
Yes.
Nothing to do with the empire,
no, as in a geographical continent of Europe.
The geographical continent of Europe was all pink, and included the UK, obviously. But when I arrived here, when I went to school here, age 14, I learned that the Brits talk about Europe, the continent, as being over there. It's somewhere else.
Yes. That's just a historical fact. It doesn't have any political baggage attached to it at all. That is just how we feel, isn't it? We see people often say, "Well, I'm going to Europe for my holidays."
You have to travel there, right?
Yes.
But whereas if you live in Holland, or if I've worked in various countries in Europe. I also worked in Holland. But people live in Belgium, work in Holland. I have worked with colleagues who work in Geneva but live over the border in France.
Yes.
You're in Europe. You get in your car. You speak other people's languages. You just drive there. You just go there, and you mix with people all the time, different nationalities, and throughout the continent you see number plates on cars from all over the continent. It's one place, and because of this bit of water, the Brits have to travel there. And
you also speak a lingo, of course, and we don't. I mean, unless we can find people that can speak English, we're going to feel more foreign in other European countries than perhaps you would.
Well, yeah. Also, it's ingrained. I mean, language. You go to school in Holland. English and maths were compulsory, not Dutch.
Are you serious?
Totally.
Oh, you live and learn. But that should, in a way, diffuse some of your other arguments. Except we probably don't know that. My reaction to you telling me that, going, "You serious?" in a voice that was several octaves higher than I intended, that probably proves why it hasn't diffused. If you were using that, if you were running the pro-EU camp and you said, "Do you know that English is compulsory in Dutch schools, but Dutch isn't? That's how welcome we are in Holland," it might actually butter some parsnips. To coin a phrase you've probably never heard before, James.
But also, there's also the baggage of the empire. My Dutch father always used to say that the Brits were a nation of people who march forward looking backwards. And there's an element of truth in that. If you look at the institutions and the pomp and ceremony and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
We have a royal family. We don't make the big fuss about it the way you do here. They're just normal people, and we just accept them. They don't really, they don't mix. We don't have issues of.
So you've covered a lot of ground. Culture, which is odd because an earlier caller suggested a reason for Euroscepticism was that our culture has been diluted. Your argument, in a way, is that it is undilutable by dint of our geographical isolation. And then you've got the history, the empire, the ruling the world, perhaps a sense of some sort of superiority, although most other European countries had empires of comparable size at various points in history. I don't know. No one yet really challenging the argument that we are a little bit more Eurosceptic than some of our European neighbours. There's plenty of opposition in those countries. No one's suggesting that they're all 100% signed up for the EU project. Marine Le Pen's success, and I think the Polish elections as well were successful for Eurosceptic positions. Fascinating stuff, though. Why? History, geography, all informing personality. Ultimately, it will come down to personality. It's not even necessarily a bad thing. I happen to think it is, but it's perfectly plausible that we're wrong and that we would be safer and better off as a country if we sort of built more moats and drawbridges and kept people at arm's length instead of embracing them and trying to get along and recognise what we've all got in common. Stephen's in Wheatamstead. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Not far from Welwyn Garden City.
Well done.
Yes, all the Hertfordshire controversialists. What I'd like to say is that I've got two broad points to make very, very quickly, as I know you've got a lot of callers.
Yes.
The first thing I'd like to say is that for very many centuries we've developed our common law system, whereas abroad you've got the Code Napoleonic and other Latin-based legal systems which sort of fed into the culture. So that I think that's one of many.
How? Because most people would not know that phrase, Code Napoleonic, and they certainly wouldn't be able to draw distinctions between sort of, Napoleonic jurisprudence and British jurisprudence.
Forgive me, that's my lawyer training.
No, so that's why I want you to translate it for dopey laymen like me.
Yeah. I think it feeds into different perceptions and different cultures and different viewpoints. And I heard somebody the other year use a wonderful word, giganticism, saying it is better to be in Europe because we can all be in solidarity. It's easier to do economic things. It's easier to defend ourselves and this, that, and the other. But I think my deeper concern as to why we're Eurosceptic is that, bearing in mind that governments knew when Ted Heath took us in,
yes,
he knew that the legislation, European Union legislation, is designed to drag us all into ever closer union.
But drag is a pejorative term. You could equally say embrace. He knew that it was designed to increase the embrace of different European countries in the hope of never repeating the follies of the 1940s.
Yeah, I think the problem is, James, is that politicians over many generations haven't been as questioning as you are, and haven't been as truthful as they could be with the electorate. In my humble opinion, we've been lied to for years, and it's made people.
By who? By the supporters of the EU or the opponents?
The Labour Party and the Conservative Party.
Because I feel that we're being lied to a lot more by Eurosceptics claiming that we have a problem, for example, with benefits tourism or health tourism. When you look at the numbers,
I agree. I think the people arguing on both sides are exaggerating and lying. If there was a rational,
you're right, aren't you? Life is wonderful. It'll be awful if we leave. Life is awful. It'll be wonderful if we leave. And that is the British debate right there.
Mm. Am I still on?
Yeah, you are.
I think if people could examine the European argument in the calm way that you disseminate it and take it apart on your show, we would all be better informed. But it's polarised, and I think it always will be, James.
And more polarised here than in other European countries. Briefly, Stephen, briefly, why then Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales a lot more likely to vote to stay, England more likely to vote to leave? So even that seems to be enforcing differences between people who didn't even realise they were different nationalities until the Scottish referendum.
I think that a debate which is already complicated had another layer of complexity put over the top of it, especially in Scotland. Whereas I think in Northern Ireland they're more pro leave the European Union for other reasons, for the unionist linkages and things like that. But as I said, I think we need lots of honest debate like your show, James.
Well, stop saying that. People think I've set you up to come on and say nice things. I'm still not entirely clear on what your position is, but that's probably a sign of what happens when you have a slightly more nuanced debate rather than just shouting. Do you realise that 500 million people could be here by tea time if we stay in the European Union? So yes, but it's equally likely that the world will be hit by an asteroid shortly after lunch and that there'll be nobody here to moan about it anyway. Time is approaching 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm very grateful to you for the way this has gone so far. I don't want to have that many conversations about the EU referendum in the run up to it unless we can find a way of doing it in a way that avoids that kind of ludicrous tomato throwing that Stephen just described quite perfectly. And it's tomatoes being thrown from both sides. Make no mistake about that. 10:45 is the time. I guess I'd have to add at this point that only one side is throwing rotten tomatoes. A couple of very good texts in. I'll be with Ian in Watford and then Thomas in Wrexham imminently. But some very interesting thoughts and some slightly mad ones. You'll allow me, I hope, to say that. First of all, an apology. Paul in Sunbury quite rightly points out I was wrong to suggest that the Earth might be hit by an asteroid and that this was just as likely as 500 million EU members seeking to move here any point soon. He says an asteroid becomes a meteorite at the moment it enters the Earth's atmosphere. James, thank you. I'm happy to apologise for that. Also, on a slightly less serious note, James, you really must learn to pronounce the word comparable correctly. It's pronounced comparable. Thank you. All the important issues being addressed here. And this one, the numbers line has to be drawn somewhere, says David. Where would you draw it? A UK population of 70 million, 80 million, 90 million or 100 million? I understand your point. I don't have an answer to your question. And the reason I don't have an answer to your question, and I know many people find this odd, many people don't, that to me, you might as well be talking about fertility. You might as well be talking about the birth rate. You know, this notion that once you start saying too many because they're foreign, You leave the door open to saying too many because they're poor, too many because they're disabled, too many, and you see that. You get that rhetoric. I'll show you what I mean, because 2 texts down. Space, James, that's the problem. The UK landmass can sustain a population of around 20 million. Fact. Google it. There's words to strike confidence into your cynical hearts. Anything above that is what it says on the tin. Unsustainable. We need to reduce the population, not increase it. No one will have this conversation. I'll tell you what, I'll have the conversation if you volunteer. Ian's in Watford. Ian, what would you like to say?
Oh, James, it's such good fun.
Isn't it?
By the way, did you get my email that I sent to you? I don't know whether you...
Ian, mate, I get 2,500 emails a day. How am I going to know whether I got one off a bloke called Ian in Watford?
On the radio all the time. You should be reading the emails.
Well, I can't just start. All right, I'll start reading the emails. You hold the fort until Alan Longfield gets here at 11:30.
The EU thing. I mean, you actually threw up quite an interesting thing before when you were saying that in Scotland and Ireland, they're more pro because obviously they've had more money from it, and possibly one of the reasons England has not been so pro because they actually haven't seen any benefits. And of course, one of the issues I always feel.
Nor has Germany.
Pardon?
Well, what benefits has Germany seen?
The fact that their industrial base is got a fantastic market to supply.
And we haven't got an industrial base.
There you go.
Yeah, so we should get one quick. Otherwise, we're going to be really at the back of the queue. And if we come out of the EU and we haven't got an industrial base, we're going to be screwed from both ends.
Well, that's a different thing. But
okay.
One of the things I think that people are uncertain about is the fact, particularly is what is the actual EU doing?
Yes.
Not, it's fine that you make all these regulations, but what's it do? There is a flood of people coming over here from EU countries.
But these are floods that are flooding into all other EU countries as well, or successful economy.
It actually is not a matter of... It is... You've said you've got this thing called the EU, which is a sort of governmental base. And what are they doing to influence and benefit all the countries within it?
Yes, you're ducking the question, though.
It's the only way they have of benefiting the countries that come into it by allowing them to go anywhere else within the system.
Yeah, but why are we more sceptical than Germany or France or Holland or other countries?
I suppose we possibly have an island mentality, which makes you a little bit more fearful.
Really?
Yeah.
The French were under Nazi occupation. They should be more fearful than us, shouldn't they?
No. We have an island mentality. Has got nothing to do with being occupied or anything. It's an island mentality.
Right.
So there is that thing, and the question is, why is the life of so many people within Europe so uncertain that they need to move to different countries? If the EU...
no, that's the island mentality that you were talking about, but you didn't realise you were about to display it. Because freedom to move to other countries is in pursuit of a better life. Most young people are very fond of the European Union because they can conceive of going to Holland to work or working in Germany or working in France. You say they must be uncertain. So we've got a kind of island mentality crossed with perhaps a refugee miscomprehension. We think the only reason that you'd ever leave a country is if you felt under threat there, which applies to Syria but does not apply to the European Union members.
I think people understand far more why people from Syria are fleeing to here. Because they are under the threat of their lives.
And yet we are, apart from Bulgaria, the least welcoming country in Europe.
That's a separate issue.
Every time I make a brilliant point, you keep telling me it's a separate issue.
Well, no. You've created this whole environment with saying we're all part of a great club together. With this EU, we're all much stronger for it together, yet things that don't appear stronger everywhere within the community.
Yeah, I can see that. And that would apply to the home nations, wouldn't it?
There was growth in all the countries because they've joined the EU. I would say fine.
All right, there is.
Well, I don't think it...
You were supposed to say fine. You're just messing with my head, Ian. It's 10:54. Thomas is in Wrexham. Thomas, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Thomas.
I think one of the main reasons why we're becoming more Eurosceptic, there's 101 reasons. Some of the main ones are a lot of people see the EU as very undemocratic. That our MEPs...
Are they right to see it as undemocratic?
Well, yeah, I would have thought so.
Who elects the MEPs?
I'm a big politics geek.
Who elects all the MEPs?
Who elects them, did you say?
Yeah.
It's the public, isn't it?
And then who elects the leadership?
Well, this is it. This is where
the MEPs. So how is it undemocratic?
Well, not necessarily, James. I think you need to do... But, let's put that aside then. You've won the argument. That's fine. Okay.
All right, so it's not undemocratic. What's the next one? Are we going to have to go through all 101?
Me personally,
yeah.
And a lot of other people think it's undemocratic. Okay, another reason...
Even though the people vote for the MEPs and the MEPs choose the leadership, you think it's undemocratic. Okay, well, that's what happens in our parliament. Who do you think chooses David Cameron as leader of the Conservative Party?
Okay, James, you've won that argument.
So stop saying it's undemocratic. And make sure you tell all your friends they're wrong, just as wrong as you are, as well. Yeah, otherwise I'm wasting my breath here.
Next one, James,
Go on.
is, it started off as a trading block,
yes.
For us to trade, to keep friends and everything, and it seems to have evolved from that, into something a lot more. And,
What has it evolved into?
Well, I'll use a recent example, okay, when the German Chancellor decided to, let's say, we'll accept, Syrian refugees or migrants, that doesn't just affect Germany. It affects the countries around it. It affects us.
So here's the question. Why do you think we're more Eurosceptic as a result of those refugees you've referred to than the country that is letting them in?
Why? Because I think, like a lot of your callers have said, we, because we're an island, we have got the mentality of we're in a better position. We're in a better position to get a better deal, and to look after ourselves. And I think that one of the reasons why, that's one reason why we're more Eurosceptic.
But that doesn't really make any sense at all.
No?
No.
So the fact that we've got water surrounding us...
No. I asked, why do you think the country that has invited in 1 million refugees, and while there's a lot of objection to it in Germany, it doesn't inform a desire to leave the European Union, and yet you're using it in a country that's hundreds of miles away, to which some of these people may end up coming. You think that's a powerful argument against the European Union, even though the country into which they're actually travelling and being welcomed at the moment doesn't. And then you answer it by saying, I think we can get a much better deal than we could if we stayed here. That's what I don't understand. Let's look at something else, because sort of immigration is kind of a given, even if it doesn't stand up to much logical scrutiny. The argument about it being undemocratic was a lot easier to dismantle than I was expecting. You said you had 101.
I'm extremely nervous now.
You said, well, of course you are. I'd be nervous if I'd come on the radio to make points that were so easily dismantled. So let's go on to point 98, because you had 101. We've taken 2 out. What's the next one? Tell me about the laws that you don't like having to obey that the EU makes.
I've got Polish blood in me, and
So did the first bloke to ring in to say he doesn't want to let any more Poles in.
European blood in me. I'm British born and bred. Happy days. But one thing, my friends and family say who are back in Poland, they feel that Poland is being, depopularised massively. I think at the minute it's 2 million. It's been depopularised.
Which might be an argument about Polish Euroscepticism, but it's not an argument about yours, is it?
No. Well, it is.
So what is?
Because I love Europe, James. I love Europe, mate.
Right.
I'm British and I want to leave the EU, but I absolutely love Europe.
But surely you'd be able to make a much better deal if you weren't in it.
A much better deal, what? It being in the EU? Did you say?
I don't know. I was just using your line back at you.
Yeah, all right then, James. Well, like I say, people feel like it's been depopulated, and a lot of the skilled people...
Are you going to give me one hook I can hang a hat on? Just one point that is just powerful and unchallengeable?
James, like I say, mate, you're a very clever guy yourself.
It's not brains, Thomas, just facts.
You'll throw it back, and...
Well, only because it's easy to do so. Give me something that's hard to throw back.
Something that's hard to throw back?
Yeah, like a point that isn't really easy to dismantle.
Right, well, the fact that it is one thing which concerns me.
The music means the news is coming. So,
word Turkey. Can you imagine if Turkey joined the European Union, which it will do, if the top dogs get their way? That would be unbelievable. And the fact that 95% of Turkey isn't even actually in Europe. It just seems like the European Union, it should be...
Okay, no, I don't know that that's a point in any sense. It's just saying I don't really like those Turks much. I don't want them coming here. I kind of knew that. It's one of those days where the clock is overtaking me. Mystery Hour, the last Mystery Hour of 2015, coming up at 12. I suspect we'll be glad of the light relief, although find some light relief, even in a subject like the EU. I like this. This is from... it's unsigned, surprisingly enough. One of these days, someone is going to come on the radio and totally humiliate the arrogant, rude, smart-ass know-all O'Brien, and I pray I will be listening. That's the only reason I listen to his nasty little show, to wait for that day. Mate, seriously, go and do something else, and if it ever happens, I'll podcast it and send it to you personally. Dean's in Dagenham. Dean, what would you like to say about Euroscepticism and Britain's strange relationship with it?
Well, I'm one of them people that you asked to call. If David Cameron come back without agreement, I would vote to stay in.
If you weren't allowed to claim an in-work benefit for 4 years if you were an EU migrant?
Yeah.
How many people do you think are doing that at the moment?
I don't know.
How much do you think it's costing us?
No, it's not to do with the money. Yeah, it costs, I think, especially from Eastern Europe, when they joined the European Union. I'm not coming from the right wing.
No, mate, I know. I think you're not coming from any wing at all. I don't mean that to sound like a criticism. I just want to know what you think it would change. How many people would it affect and how much money would it save?
Yeah, but it's not my point, the money, James. My point is 25% of this country is on, I think, ridiculous wages, and wages are not going up, and they will never go up while there's firms, business can get a tap to cheap labour.
They will if it's illegal. They will if you unionise and insist on higher wages and withdraw your labour if you don't get them.
I'm all for unions, James.
Right.
This is what I don't understand, is where the left can't see this.
They can. But no one can see the left in this country because they're absolutely surrounded on... Jeremy Corbyn comes out with some fairly low-level quasi-socialist rhetoric, talking about, if you like, collective bargaining powers, anything, and he's treated like Karl Marx. He's treated like Lenin, Dean. You know that, and I know that. But I want to come back to this point, and I want to do it very, very warmly. And if you think that I'm getting nasty, you tell me, and I'll stop, my friend, all right? Because you paid me the compliment of calling in. If you don't know how many people it affects or how much money it will actually raise, you've been fed a line that it somehow drives down wages for homegrown workers. There's 1.7 million people unemployed in this country at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see why it's a little odd to say this issue that I know very, very little about, but I have a sort of emotional sense of, will determine how I vote for something as important as membership of the European Union?
No, but look, the way I see it, James, is that common sense will tell you at the moment unemployment's going down, isn't it? So there's more work. So by rights, normally wages would go up a bit. And
no, not unless there's a legislative requirement for them to go up. There's 1.7 million people unemployed. The only reason there's going to be a raise in wages next year is because the Chancellor is imposing it by law. How do you get a pay rise at work? You get everybody else to join you in downing tools until you get one.
Exactly.
You will never, ever get a pay rise if you're still believing the line that the reason why you're not getting paid more is because of that Polish fella over the road who you've never actually met.
No, it's nothing to do with Polish or anything, and I wish them a nice life.
But you want them to have their in-work benefits taken away, even though you don't know how many get it and how much money it costs?
Well, I would imagine anyone on low wage will get in-work benefits, because you can't...
Not if they're Polish.
Without them.
Not if they're Polish, mate.
Well, they don't get in-work benefits.
You're the fella who rang me to say you're going to change your vote if Cameron takes it away from them.
Otherwise, he wouldn't be asking for it. Of course they get in-work benefits.
Yes, but the number is negligible. And also, when the new blooming tax credit coals come in, albeit that Osborne's backtracked a little bit on that, the problem's going to be even smaller than it is now. And you're the bloke who rang me to say you'd change your vote if you've just said you can't live in this country without them.
It's the problem if we lost the in-work benefit.
Yes.
Unless they replace it with something with higher wages and that.
Well, I think we're on the same team.
I've got an argument with Polish people getting our money. That's not my argument. My argument is how do the working class, the bottom 20% of this country, who are on no-hour contract, how do they fight back and get better conditions?
I'll tell you. The first thing you do is you recognise that number is colour-blind, nationality blind, country blind. You focus on that 20% at the bottom, and you collectivise, you join forces, and you fight together, which you can never do while people are pouring poison into your ear about it all being the fault of the fella over there from Lithuania.
No, I'm not saying it's his. I'm just talking about Labour. I don't care where they could be, from Mars.
There you go.
But
so
supply and
the opposite of right-wing rhetoric would be to say, join forces and fight, unionise, collectivise, withdraw Labour. You tell me what sort of reception you'd get from the British media at the moment if you stood on a platform at Hyde Park Corner, Dean, and started talking about why we need stronger trade unions, we need more collective bargaining, and we have to be a lot more ready to strike than we currently are.
Exactly. No, I agree with you totally.
Good. So do a lot of Polish people. It's 11:15.
James O'Brien, weekdays 10 till 1 on LBC.
I've just been reminded that last year, for the final mystery hour of the year, I did it all dressed as Father Christmas. So in answer to your question, Joe, no, I'm not dressing up as Santa again this year. There are no plans currently to do that. 18 minutes after 11 is the time. Children's Commission around Longfield. Here after 11:30, mystery hour with us from 12. Before that, a couple more calls on the question of Euroscepticism. And I know I tried to avoid it, but I can't. I just have this allergy to media-manipulated ignorance. It brings me out in hives. It really does. And people say, oh, they make all our laws. Okay, tell me a couple. Oh, I can't. Oh, we're going to have to tarmac over the country. We're so full. We've only built on about 11% of the nation. There's more of this country given over to golf courses than there is to domestic housing. Oh, all right. What else have we got? 500 million people could move here tomorrow. They could, yeah, but there's nothing legally to stop the entire population of this country moving to the Mull of Kintyre at tea time today. Logic tells us, and common sense suggests, that we just won't. And that's what makes my hives emerge. That deliberate abnegation of logic and common sense, and these lying, nasty, self-enriching, self-interested politicians and journalists who take decent, ordinary people and make them frightened, and will possibly make them, because I don't actually have a dog in the race at the moment for the EU referendum. I just wouldn't want to get stuck in a lift with anybody who passionately advocates leaving. We may end up voting to march off a cliff. We've done it before. Look at the last general election. Number of people. It was a doctor, really, that brought it home, wasn't it? During the discussion about the junior doctors' strike. So it's sort of effectively saying, and I had sympathy for her and indeed for her situation and all the junior doctors, but effectively saying, I voted Conservative. I didn't realise they'd be coming after me. So what is it about this country, particularly the English section of it, and Euroscepticism? Because the Empire, I mean, Scotland, in imperial terms, punched way above its weight. Scotland had a much bigger influence on the planet per capita than England did as part of the Empire and its ramifications. So why would there be much more enthusiasm for membership there than there is in England? And you can talk about getting stuff out of it, getting a return on your investment, and then you're left with the question, why the hell is Germany leading the field on this when they put in way, way more than they ever take out? Alperan's in Hackney. Alper, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I'm just a little bit surprised about all of the callers that you've had today. I mean, I myself am a Turkish Cypriot descent, born and raised in Australia and now living in the UK. And it surprises me how people come from so many different ethnic backgrounds and suddenly forget their background and say, shut the door on these foreigners. And for starters, when people are displaced and move into the UK, they do need some sort of assistance in order to live. So, taking away benefits doesn't make sense.
Well, no, being displaced is a description of a refugee. People moving here to work aren't displaced.
Yes, you are correct. I apologise for that.
That's all right.
In essence, they still need some assistance until they start working and covering their own costs. That doesn't mean I'm not justifying and saying that they all should get benefits, but the ones that do need benefits initially should have a startup. Thereafter, I live in London. I work in Dalston, East London, and East London was a place that you could never enter once upon a time. Now it's a thriving metropolis, and it's all.
Don't tell Donald Trump that, will you?
No, of course not. I mean, but East London wouldn't be what it is without the foreign influences.
So someone tweeted me oddly, and it was the same weekend I went to see Carol, the new film with Kate Blanchett in it at the Ritzy Cinema in Brixton. Someone actually tweeted me while I was in the car with my wife on our way to Brixton to see a film, saying, it's all very well you coming out with this lefty claptrap. I bet you wouldn't be seen dead in Brixton after dark. And I was in Brixton after dark at the time, but I didn't bother replying. That's the perception.
Exactly.
So we can chuckle. Let me put put your mind at rest. Don't worry about the weight of calls to the programme. This is one of the mornings when the producer was under instruction to put through as many people who disagree with me as possible, although I think the fella who's waiting for me to get my ass kicked is probably still sitting on his hands. So don't worry about that. Then you know what the numbers say. Give me the benefit of your perspective and insights. What do you think causes it? On a level that happens in all countries, but arguably happens a little bit more here than it does in others.
I would disagree. I think the numbers are very negligent. That it's not just the foreign nationals, but the British themselves also have a certain number of in the population that will rely on benefits. The benefits are there for those that need it. It's just a stereotypical thought that, if the Polish come here, or if the Turks come here, or I don't know, if the Jews come here, they're going to benefit from the system and try and work and hide their earnings at the same time. That's a lie. That's a complete lie. I'm an accountant. I deal with a lot of many different nationals. It's not just the Turkish community, but many different nationals, including British, Irish, and so on. And everyone is a hard-working person, as far as I can see. They declare their taxes. They work very hard for their living.
Yes, but that's because you're describing people. You're not reciting newspaper articles or politicians' lies.
That's
This is all very well, you saying you've met all these hard-working, honest, tax-paying people, but 500 million? Bah! That's the response.
No. Well, what about the Brits that moved to Spain, for example? And
they're different. They're not immigrants. They're just long-term tourists.
Good talking to you anyway, James.
Good talking to you. Seriously, don't be downcast. It's a lot more fun as a batsman to be facing fast bowlers, or at least bowlers who think they're fast. John is in Putney. John, what would you like to say? What do you think the reason is? Give me the British explanation.
Fundamentally, it's down to the fact that the British had a huge empire. We're used to being a global superpower, and we really haven't reconciled ourselves with the change of circumstances.
And it's the recentness of empire.
Mindset.
It's the recentness. It's not quite the living memory, but the 19th century doesn't feel that far away, whereas the Portuguese Empire or the Spanish Empire or the Danish Empire possibly feel a little... Well, actually, I don't know. You'd have to ask a Portuguese person, wouldn't you? But they don't feel as near culturally as our empire does.
I think it's a mindset attitude, and the fact is that the British, in a way, were in decline a lot longer ago than we tend to think. Our comparative decline set in 1870. We were pretty much on the skids by the early part of the 20th century. We were bankrupt in 1916. We were bankrupt in 1947. But we've never really got used to it. We've been living beyond our means. We've been pretending to, we have actually been and still are a global atomic power, and we're still living up to that. We spent our martial aid money on keeping our armed forces stuffed up in the...
Why would that make us more allergic to integration? I know that there is an answer to that question, but I'm not sure the evidence you're providing supplies it yet.
I think we can get by without them. I think we think we can get by on our own.
We can get by without them. I mean, no one's going to dispute that. It's a question of whether we're better or worse off.
Nobody can in a global context today. In a way, they never could, but certainly today.
So you're pursuing, although you're too polite to say so, this is the Little Englander position.
Yeah.
And that's interesting that it is Little Englander and not Little Brit.
Yes, I think the Scots, the Welsh, the Irish have, to a lesser or greater degree, adapted to change circumstances, and I think it's why their attitude towards Europe is different.
Or they're used to being a junior partner in an equation, and we're simply not. And just by economies of scale, we might have the second biggest economy, but we do not feel like a senior partner in the European Union. Maybe they should be trying to push that line harder to persuade us that we do punch above our weight.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. It's a very good point that I think we as English, we see ourselves differently, and we tend to be in denial about an awful lot of other things.
And there is a link with education. The more educated you are, the more likely you are to see the light, and the less educated you are, the more likely you are to think your whole life is somebody else's fault. And then step into the breach. Here's a nice little demagogue. Here's a rabble-rousing newspaper columnist. Here's a politician with a failed career and desperation for fame and fortune, and they will endorse your idea that it's all their fault that you haven't got what you want. Whereas really, it might not be anybody's fault. And if it is somebody's fault, it's either your own fault or it's somebody way, way up the food chain yanking your strings without you even feeling it.
Yeah, and also we have a particular type of press which is not really found in quite the same way in the rest of Europe. We tend to have large national newspapers, for instance, with a predominant agenda, whereas most other countries, if you look at, say, Germany, France, they tend to have regional papers. They don't, I mean, they have one or two national ones, but they don't have quite the same.
So specifics become more pertinent. You're not going to be able to get away with these overarching headline figures. In the smaller the environment into which you're introducing them, the easier they'll be to unpick. Ironic as well that the media you describe has been created in large part by an economic migrant called Rupert Murdoch, of course. Now lives in America. He's not even Australian anymore. Freedom of movement for him, but not for you, plebs. Bart's in Barnet. Bart, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. I'm just calling from perspective of a Polish immigrant myself. I've lived in this country for the last 13 years now. And to me, I love it. It's just to do with the whole blame culture and how it's always good to point the finger at someone else. You know, there's unemployment because they're taking our jobs. You know, I can't do this because, you know, someone else is doing it. So it's a lot to do with that. It's a lot of blaming a lot of other problems with the economy. How
does it register with you personally, though? Because is it something you've experienced on a personal level rather than on a sort of meta level?
I mean, on a personal level, I am not as such, especially with the people that I work with the people that I've everyday contact with, because they're either because they're just nice to me and they don't want to express their own personal views, which may conflict with my situation here, or just to do with the fact with the kind of people I'm friends with and the kind of people I have contact with. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, actually, I think we possibly do people a disservice when we pursue that line, because even the most virulent sort of xenophobes or even that's not fair, even the most virulent opponents of the position that Europhiles describe, when they actually meet people, and I'm going to patronise you slightly, when they actually meet people like you, they realise that they've been persuaded to be frightened and angry about the wrong stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's why you see the support for immigration in areas where there isn't any at the lowest. The constituencies where there aren't any immigrants are the ones where people routinely report that immigration has ruined their lives, and that's why they're going to vote in the way that they vote. Bart, many thanks. David, I'm sorry. Daniel, Tristan, Gaz, Michael, David, Bart. Bart we spoke to, Bill we didn't. I'm sorry to all of you. You won't be surprised to learn that we're probably going to talk about the European Union again before that referendum actually happens. June of next year, the Clever Money is saying at the moment. I don't know whether the prospect of returning to it on a monthly, maybe even a weekly basis as that date looms ever closer fills you with dread or excitement. Hopefully neither. That's my job.